Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the first part of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries, and I call to order its plenary meeting. I wish to inform the Conference that in accordance with Rule 17 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure, I will serve as temporary President of the Conference until the election of its President. And I should like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. As representatives are aware, by its Resolution 76-251 of 28 February 2022, the General Assembly decided to further reschedule the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries and on an exceptional basis to hold it in 2 parts. The first part will consist of one plenary meeting to consider the draft Doha Programme of Action for Least Developed Countries. The second part of the conference will be held in Doha from 5 to 9 March 2023. I now invite the conference to proceed with the election of its president. It is my understanding that there is general agreement among all delegations to elect His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar, as President of the Conference. May I take it that the Conference wishes to elect by acclamation His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani as President of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries? I see no objection. It's so decided. I warmly congratulate His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani on his election, and I invite him to take his seat at the podium to take over the proceedings of the conference. And I request the protocol to escort His Excellency.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فخامة رئيس جمهورية ملاوي ورئيس مجموعة أقل البلدان نمواً، سعادة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة القائم بأعمال الأمين العام لمؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً، أصحاب السعادة السيدات والسادة، يشرفني بداية أن أنقل لكم تحيات حضرة صاحب السمو الشيخ تميم بن حمد آل ثاني أمير دولة قطر، مقرونة بأطيب التمنيات بأن تتكلل أعمال الجزء الأول من هذا المؤتمر بالنجاح والتوفيق. ونعرب عن امتناننا لانتخاب قطر اليوم رئيساً لمؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً، الذي تعتز حكومة بلادي باستضافة الجزء الثاني منه في الدوحة خلال الفترة من 5 إلى 9 مارس 2022. كما أود أن أغتنم هذه الفرصة لأرحب بصفة خاصة بمشاركة فخامة السيد لازاروس تشاكويرا رئيس جمهورية ملاوي ورئيس مجموعة أقل البلدان نمواً الحاضر معنا اليوم، ولنعبر عن تقديرنا لجهوده المتفانية لتوجيه انتباه المجتمع الدولي للتحديات التي تواجه أقل البلدان نمواً. أصحاب السعادة السيدات والسادة، أود أن أبدأ بياني على نحو مفعم بالأمل، وأن أشير إلى أنه على الرغم من الظروف الاستثنائية المرتبطة بتداعيات جائحة فيروس كورونا التي حالت دون عقد المؤتمر في موعده، إلا أننا متفائلين بأن الصيغة التي اتخذتها الجمعية العامة لعقد المؤتمر في جزئين ستتيح فرصة للمضي قدما في اعتماد برنامج عمل الدوحة لأقل البلدان نمواً والبدء في تنفيذه. وبتوجيه من حضرة صاحب السمو الشيخ تميم بن حمد آل ثاني أمير دولة قطر، واستنادا لسياسة دولة قطر القائمة على الشراكة مع المجتمع الدولي، وانسجاما مع التزام وحرص بلادي على دعم قضايا أقل البلدان نمواً، بادرت دولة قطر لاستضافة مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً، وكلنا ثقة بأن هذا المؤتمر سيساهم في تلبية احتياجات وأولويات هذه البلدان ودعم مسيرتها نحو تحقيق التنمية فيها للسنوات العشرة القادمة. كما أود أن أشير إلى أن دولة قطر لا تزال تتطلع بنفس القدر من الأهمية إلى مواصلة جهودها الحثيثة في الفترة القادمة نحو انعقاد الجزء الثاني من المؤتمر في الدوحة، وستبقى ملتزمة بالعمل بنفس الروح للحفاظ على الزخم الذي حققناه والتعاون مع كافة الشركاء لضمان إنجاح المؤتمر ومخرجاته. أصحاب السعادة، إن هذه الفترة الحافلة بالمتغيرات الجديدة والمقلقة فاقمت من التحديات القائمة، كما لا زالت تهدد بتقويض مسار سنوات من التقدم والمكاسب الإنمائية المهمة، ويشكل الافتقار للوصول المنصف إلى اللقاحات عائقاً أمام جهود التعافي من الجائحة، ما يستدعي تعزيز التعاون الدولي لدعم أقل البلدان نمواً للتعافي ولتحقيق التنمية المستدامة والشاملة. وانطلاقاً من دورها الرائد في العمل الإنساني والداعم للجهود الدولية لمكافحة الوباء، قدمت دولة قطر مساهمات تجاوزت 140 مليون دولار أمريكي، كما وقعت اتفاقية مساهمة أساسية مع منظمة الصحة العالمية بقيمة 10 ملايين دولار أمريكي لدعم برنامج عمل المنظمة ومبادرة تسريع إتاحة أدوات مكافحة فيروس كورونا في الدول الأكثر احتياجاً. كما ساهمت دولة قطر خلال الجائحة ومن خلال صندوق قطر للتنمية بتقديم المساعدات ل 92 دولة عبر العالم، إيماناً منا بأهمية التضامن العالمي لتجاوز آثار الجائحة وخاصة على الدول الأقل نمواً. أصحاب السعادة، إن برنامج عمل الدوحة لأقل البلدان نمواً الذي نتطلع إلى اعتماده اليوم سيشكل خطوة مهمة لنجاح الجزء الثاني من المؤتمر الذي سينعقد في الدوحة، خاصة وأنه سيكون أول برنامج عمل سيتصدى لمعالجة تداعيات وباء فيروس كورونا على أقل البلدان نمواً ويعطيها الأولوية القصوى. إننا واثقون بأن برنامج عمل الدوحة سيحظى بمتابعة واهتمام واسع النطاق على المستوى العالمي، وسيكون بمثابة خارطة طريق وأساس متين لرفع مستوى الطموح وعدم ترك أحد خلف الركب، وذلك لما ينطوي عليه من أدوات وتدابير مهمة لإحداث التغيير، وما يعكسه من التزام لكافة الشركاء لتوفير المزيد من الموارد وتحقيق الإمكانات الكاملة التي تتيحها العلوم والتكنولوجيا والابتكار وصولاً إلى التنمية الشاملة. كما أؤكد أن التمكن من ترجمة مجمل تلك الوعود والالتزامات الطويلة الأجل إلى إجراءات عملية يتطلب تعاون جميع الشركاء. ختاماً، نؤكد أن دولة قطر ستواصل سياستها المستندة لروح التعاون والمبادرة والتي طالما تمسكنا بها وحرصنا عليها، وكلنا ثقة بأننا ومن خلال تعاوننا جميعاً نمتلك القدرة والفرصة ليكون هذا المؤتمر منعطفاً مهماً للاستجابة لتطلعات البلدان الأقل نمواً. أكرر شكري لكم ونتطلع للقائكم في الدوحة في شهر مارس من العام القادم. أدعو الآن معالي السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة إلى الإدلاء ببيانه.
Your Excellency, Mr. President of the Conference, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants, Mesdames et Messieurs, il y a 50 ans, l'Organisation des Nations Unies créait la catégorie des pays les moins avancés. Elle reconnaissait ainsi sans ambiguïté deux vérités essentielles. D'abord, le fait que certaines histoires, fragilités et inégalités structurelles qui n'étaient souvent pas du fait des pays concernés constituaient d'énormes obstacles au développement. Ensuite, que chaque pays a besoin de conditions de concurrence équitables pour libérer son potentiel humain et construire une économie forte et résiliente. La vulnérabilité des pays les moins avancés ne relève peut-être pas des mêmes causes qu'il y a 50 ans. Je pense notamment au Covid-19 et au changement climatique, pour n'en citer que deux. Mais si nous ne les prenons pas en compte, les résultats seront les mêmes. L'inégalité, la faim, la pauvreté, la défaillance des infrastructures, la concurrence pour l'accès à des ressources qui s'amenuisent, l'insécurité et le conflit. Aujourd'hui, vous prenez une nouvelle initiative pour que la situation s'améliore. Les espoirs, les rêves et les vies et les moyens de subsistance d'un huitième de l'humanité reposent entre les pages du programme d'action de Doha. Je salue le soutien du Qatar et la détermination de tous les pays ici présents à faire avancer ce programme, notamment en aidant 15 pays supplémentaires parmi les moins avancés à quitter cette catégorie d'ici 2031 et à ne plus y retourner. Aujourd'hui, j'aimerais appeler votre attention sur les 5 éléments essentiels qui figurent dans le programme d'action de Doha et qui aideront les pays les moins avancés à se relever à court terme, à atteindre les objectifs de développement durable à moyen terme et à se développer et prospérer sur le long terme. Le premier de ces éléments vitaux est l'accès aux vaccins. Alors que les fabricants produisent 1,5 milliard de doses par mois, près de 3 milliards de personnes vivant pour la plupart dans les pays les moins avancés attendent toujours leur première injection. Cet échec est la conséquence directe de décisions politiques et budgétaires qui privilégient la santé et la richesse des habitants des pays les plus avancés aux dépenses de la vie des habitants des pays plus pauvres. Notre monde ne peut pas se permettre un redressement du Covid à deux vitesses. Malgré les nombreuses autres crises que nous connaissons aujourd'hui, nous devons atteindre notre objectif de vacciner 70% de la population de tous les pays d'ici le milieu de l'année. Les gouvernements, les laboratoires pharmaceutiques et les organisations régionales et internationales doivent travailler ensemble pour multiplier le nombre de pays capables de produire des tests, des vaccins et des traitements grâce au partage de licences et des droits de propriété intellectuelle et à la fourniture d'un soutien technologique et financier adapté. Nous devons mettre fin à cette pandémie pour tout le monde et dans tous les pays. Excellencies, the second lifeline is a global financial system that puts the needs of the least developed countries first. More than ever, developing countries need to invest in sectors vital to reducing poverty and increasing resilience, job creation, expanded social protection, food security, universal health care, quality education, and digital connectivity. But they are up against a morally bankrupt global financial system that stands in the way. We must recognize that this system was designed by the rich and powerful to benefit the rich and powerful. Its cruel logic sustains inequalities rather than fostering development. And this includes an unfair debt architecture that not only charges poor countries much more money to borrow on the market than advanced economies, but downgrades them when they even think of restructuring their debt or applying for debt relief. These must change, starting with reforming the international financial architecture to support all countries. LDCs require urgent debt relief, restructuring and cancellation in some cases. We need to examine the role of credit rating agencies. They should be able to borrow at a low cost and be protected in times of crisis, including through integrating measures like hurricane clauses into debt contracts. We also need to increase liquidity available to LDCs, including recapitalizing multilateral development banks, rechanneling special drawing rights. And we need to create a fair tax system and combat illicit financial flows to reinvest some of the massive pockets of global wealth into people and countries who need it most. I also look forward to your efforts to establish an international investment support center for LDCs. The third lifeline is supporting structural transformations across LDCs. Most economic growth in these countries is linked to natural resources or extractive sectors, highly volatile in the short term and vulnerable to fluctuating commodity prices, marketplace swings, and the impacts of climate change. These sectors are further inhibited by poor education and training opportunity for workers, weak physical infrastructure, and lack of access to productivity-enhancing technologies. The pandemic made the situation far worse, disrupting the powerful economic engines of trade, manufacturing, and transportation, now aggravated by the consequences of the war in Ukraine. LDCs need structural transformation support now. They need support to increase their participation in global value chains now. And this means investing in a healthy, educated, and skilled workforce that can drive economic growth, including the proposal to create an online STEM university for LDCs. It means modernizing infrastructure and transportation networks and facilitating trade flows to reduce costs and increase efficiencies. And it means realizing the benefits of universal digital connectivity so businesses can compete and flourish in the global economy. It means transforming extractive sectors and creating greener jobs and greener economies. And it means promoting open and fair trade rules so all countries can compete on a level playing field, no matter their position on the development ladder. The fourth lifeline is climate action. Least developed countries did not cause the climate crisis, but they are living with its worst impacts. The latest IPCC report showed how deaths from floods, droughts, and storms have been 15 times higher in the most vulnerable countries and regions. In areas of high vulnerability around the globe, home to 3.6 billion people, over 100 climate risks will become more severe. Some will be irreversible. We have a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to hold warming to 1.5 degrees and secure a livable future. Scientists tell us that we must cut global emissions by 45% this decade, but we are nowhere near this target. Current national plans would see emissions rise by a disastrous 14% in 2030. We cannot let this happen. LDCs need a massive boost in technical and financial support to spark a just transition to renewable energy and to green jobs. And they also need a massive boost in support to build resilience against the impacts already battering them. All development banks must urgently work with governments to design and deliver bankable projects. We need to see 50% of climate finance going to adaptation and reform the eligibility systems so vulnerable nations can access it much more easily than today. Developed countries must deliver on their 100 billion climate finance committing in 2022 to support developing countries. And promise must turn into reality. The fifth lifeline is the lifeline of peace and security. Today, we face the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945. And least developed countries represent the lion's share of these hotspots. Peace and security cannot take hold in an absence of development, nor can development take hold in an absence of peace and security. Or in countries where historical injustices, inequalities, and systematic oppression have locked generations of people in cycles of disadvantage and poverty. Or where basic services like health, education, security, and justice are lacking. But the problems that affect development do not just result from conflict within developing countries. For example, the effects of the war in Ukraine are reverberating across regions around the world, threatening to exacerbate economic and social vulnerabilities in developing countries, particularly LDCs. Food prices have reached a 14-year high. Oil prices have surged to their highest since 2008, and fertilizer prices have escalated. For countries already struggling to recover, this is a recipe for human and economic disaster. My proposed new agenda for peace calls on the global community to work as one, in solidarity as a human family, to address the roots of violent conflicts by investing in development. And this includes a new social contract within all societies, from universal health coverage, social protection and safety nets accessible to all, to education and training for all people so they can envision and build better, more prosperous futures. And we need to build national institutions and justice systems that are inclusive and resilient to corruption and abuse of power, anchored in human rights and the rule of law. Excellencies, across these 5 lifelines and the entire Doha program of action, least developed countries can count on the total commitment of the entire UN system. From day one, the collaboration and spirit of solidarity that resulted in this program has been deeply inspiring. We are proud to be on this journey with all of you as we put the needs of the least developed countries where they belong, first in our plans, first in our investments, and always first in our actions. Thank you.
أشكر معالي الأمين العام على بيانه، وأدعو الآن فخامة السيد لازاروس مكارثي شاكويرا رئيس جمهورية ملاوي إلى الإدلاء ببيان باسم أقل البلدان نمواً.
Your Excellency, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Qatar and President of the 5th United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries, UN LDC5. Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Ms. Heidi Shorters-Fox, Secretary General of the UN LDC5 Conference. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. As a global community, we are living at a time of great consequence that demands great courage. The confluence of global forces is marching against humanity at a frightening speed and pushing us toward calamity. For starters, our societies and economies have been under attack from climate change events happening in quicker succession than ever before. My own country of Malawi is a case in point, for it suffered deep wounds in 2019 at the hands of Cyclone Idai and Kenneth. And while those wounds are still fresh, we have just been attacked again by tropical storms Anna and Gombe in the last 7 weeks, leaving a trail of destruction and death. And if climate change is doing this to least developed countries that are inland, imagine what it is doing to those that are coastal, like Mozambique, Madagascar, Bangladesh, Comoros, Haiti, and Myanmar. This suffocating onslaught is happening while we as LDCs are already choking from the unsustainable debt burden we bear, which is racing towards the $1 trillion mark. It is happening while we, as LDCs, are already choking from the socioeconomic devastation caused by COVID-19 pandemic, which has increased poverty levels in our countries by 35% in the past 2 years. It is happening while we, as LDCs, are already choking from countries in the global north adopting COVID-19 containment measures that disproportionately disadvantaged LDCs, including inequalities in vaccine distribution, travel restrictions, and access to global markets and supply chains. And now, it is happening while we as LDCs are also choking from the rising costs of goods triggered by the war in Eastern Europe. As you can see, the current global context could not be more pressing. It demands a collaborative, collective, and courageous response. It demands the adoption of the Doha Program of Action, for it is our best opportunity for charting a recovery path for the world's most vulnerable countries. Action is our only hope. Granted, the Doha Program of Action is ambitious, but it has to be. Surely, it is not too much to ask that we have a program whose ambition is to show solidarity with the world's poorest people. Surely, it is not too much to ask that we have a program whose ambition is to accelerate sustainable development in countries where poverty levels have become unsustainable, a burden for the global economy. Surely, it is not too much to ask that we have a program whose ambition is to achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development in this decade of action. We therefore insist that the adoption of the Doha Program of Action is a must. It is a must because it contains measures for eradicating our people's poverty. It is a must because it contains measures for ending our people's hunger and malnutrition. It is a must because it contains measures for making internet access universal, for diversifying our economies, for increasing our exports and trade, and for setting a benchmark for ODA. It is a must because it includes the establishment of an online university, an international investment support center, and food stock holding for enabling LDCs to build back better. In fact, the very reason our nations are brought together under the banner of LDCs is to move together towards the kind of shared prosperity that would one day make the term LDCs obsolete. So the Doha Program of Action is a must because it contains measures for enabling LDCs meet the criteria for graduation. But for the Doha Program of Action to succeed in achieving this goal, it needs implementation. 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 The implementing actions that we take over the next 10 years, along with strong monitoring mechanisms at global and regional levels, are foundational and critical. I therefore stand here on behalf of all LDCs to pledge our total commitment to the full implementation of the Program of Action, as well as to call on our development partners to respond in kind. Specifically, I call on the entire UN system for support, which must be rendered coherently and consistently, including the support of UN resident coordinators and country teams in the countries where the target populations are domiciled. I call upon the UN leadership to strengthen the Office of the High Representative for the LDC, LLDC, and SIDS, for not only has this office been instrumental in driving the progress we have made, but its workload as we move towards implementation has increased. And I call upon the United Nations Development System to support efforts to implement the program at all levels. And crucially, I call upon our development partners to go beyond fulfilling their commitments and also be responsive to the pressing needs that are created within LDCs by unforeseen events. But as much as we need support going forward, I must hasten to add that we are grateful for the support we have had thus far. Even the support that Malawi has received in chairing the LDCs has been immense. So, on behalf of all 46 LDCs, I say thank you to our partners, to the President of the conference, to the people and government of Qatar, to the representatives of Bangladesh and Canada, and to the Secretary General of the conference and the entire UN Secretariat. Your support gives us confidence that the best is yet to come, especially as we look forward to the adoption of the political declaration in Doha next year. Thank you all for your attention.